ground was frozen. Instead of digging in for the winter, the Germans attempted to advance further. They reached within 30 miles of Moscow. The weather would now prove decisive. Temperatures would drop to minus 50 degrees at night. The Germans did not have the necessary equipment to fight in such a harsh environment. The oil in tank engines froze, and troops did not have winter uniforms. Frostbite would eventually injure more soldiers than the Russians. The Red Army staged a counterattack. They were fully equipped for the cold, and their machinery was designed to work in such low temperatures. In the battles that ensued, German panzers reached the very outskirts of Moscow. But the weather and the Red Army were taking their toll. On the 5th of December, the advance units of the army were pulled back and offensive operations were suspended. Field Marshal von Bock advocated a retreat of 50 miles to a defensive line, but Hitler issued orders that even limited retreats were unthinkable. This directive would prove disastrous for German soldiers and eventually for the defense of Germany.
It comes down finally to how close they got to Moscow. The answer is very close indeed, and the extra 150 miles which Stalin had carved for himself, and the extra 2 months which they might have had they not attacked into the Balkans, have figured very largely in that debate. But finally, the Germans did simply not have enough forces to defeat the Soviet Union militarily. The only way they could defeat it was by a political collapse within the Soviet Union. With hindsight, if you wish to pick the week in which the Second World War was won and lost, it is that week beginning the 5th of December 1941. As Operation Typhoon peaks, 2 days later, on the far side of the world, the Japanese attack the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, and then, loyal to their alliance with the Japanese, a few days later, the Germans declare war on the United States, not the other way around. And the effect of this, linking the war in Europe with the war in Asia, is to transform this into a truly global war, the Second World War.
"1941 saw the Germans embroiled in a conflict in North Africa, something Hitler had vowed not to do. The Italians had launched an invasion of Egypt in September 1940. Unlike the German blitzkrieg tactics, the Italian army advanced some 60 miles and then dug themselves in. On the 7th of December, the British tested the Italians' defences with a two-pronged attack. Almost immediately, Italian soldiers started surrendering. Over the next 30 days, over 39,000 Italians were taken prisoner. The British swept into Libya and on to Tobruk, facing little opposition. Hitler was concerned that if the British took Libya, they could mount an offensive on Italy, or even threaten his beloved Operation Barbarossa. He reluctantly decided to send support to the Italians in the shape of the newly enlarged Africa Corps. Major Erwin Rommel was chosen to command the expedition. Rommel was a general who liked to lead from the front, and soon he was to earn the nickname the Desert Fox. The British were still some 400 miles from Tripoli, and many of their troops had been sent to reinforce the armies in Greece. This gave Rommel time to acclimatize and train his troops.
War in the desert was war in its purest form, almost unhindered by civilian occupation, unhindered by terrain factors except large expanses of desert rock and sand, dependent very heavily upon supplies, and very much suitable to the kind of styles of rapid manoeuvre which Rommel proceeded to make his own.
Although ordered to hold his defensive line, Rommel was impatient and launched an assault against the British line at El Aghelia. The British retreat was so swift, it convinced Rommel that the British were under strength and vulnerable. He carried on his advance, writing home, "I decided to stay on the heels of the retreating enemy and make a bid to seize the whole of Cyrenaica at a stroke." His push forward continued, against the wishes of the German High Command, until he reached the fortress of Tobruk. The next few weeks saw this fort heavily defended, and the ensuing siege resulted in a stalemate. The German divisions pushed on in a two-pronged attack, and they linked up on the 27th of May. In just 15 weeks, Rommel had rescued the Italians, advanced 1,000 miles east, and now stood at the doors of Egypt. In June, a British counterattack called Operation Battleaxe attempted to take the Halfaya Pass. As the British advanced, Rommel sent panzers around their flanks in an attempt at encirclement. Heavy tank losses were inflicted on the British, and only a swift retreat prevented the British divisions being trapped. The victory greatly enhanced Rommel's reputation. Over the next few months, the British and the Germans engaged in a number of battles.
So the campaign in North Africa becomes rather like stretching an elastic band. The Germans attack out to the extent of their ability, run out of supplies, are weakened as a result. The British counterattack, the Germans fall back on their supplies, and the campaign moves back and forth up and down the coastline. The British troops called it the Benghazi Handicap from the number of times they had been through that town in the course of the battle. And time again, Rommel is told from German higher headquarters he is not to advance and that he cannot be given the supplies and particularly the fuel to help him advance. With the British controlling Malta, with the difficulties of convoys through the Mediterranean, with the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force active in the Mediterranean, fuel is Rommel's critical issue. And time again, he disregards his orders and attacks forwards, and he very nearly makes it.
Operation Venezia on the 26th of May saw an offensive which was vital to ensure Rommel's supply lines. His battle plan was daring. He would feint a frontal attack, all the time moving his tanks in a wide sweep behind the Gazala line and down on the sea. This was a gamble, as the Panzer's supply lines would be stretched to the limit. By the 1st of June, his plan had succeeded, and the supply lines were kept open. Rommel wanted a thrust to the Suez Canal, and on the 23rd of June, after the fall of Tobruk, his new offensive started. However, determined British resistance slowed his advance. The turning point in Africa came with a new British commander, Lieutenant General Bernard Law Montgomery. He promised a determined stand at the El Alamein line. A lull in fighting bought much-needed time to reinforce and resupply the British Eighth Army. Under Monty's leadership, morale was high, and the RAF and naval attacks in the Mediterranean weakened Rommel's supply lines.